There's a hamlet in the east of Poland called Emilcin. It's a small place, flat farming country patched with woodland in the Lublin region, a long way from any city. In 1978 it was deeper still, deep in the Communist People's Republic of Poland, where the police were called the citizen militia, where the telephone was a rare thing in a farmhouse, and where talk of flying saucers wasn't encouraged and wasn't safe and wasn't, for a sensible person, worth the trouble. The man this story is about was a sensible person. His name was Jan Wolski. He was 70 years old. He was a farmer and the son and grandson of farmers, and he had spent his whole life on the land around Emilcin. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he went to mass. He was, by every account of everyone who knew him, one of the steadiest and most truthful men in the district, the kind of old countryman who says exactly what he sees and nothing more, because embroidering a thing would be a small sort of lie, and he didn't tell lies. On the morning of the 10th of May, 1978, at around 8 o'clock, Jan Wolski hitched his horse to his cart and set off down a track through the woods. It was an ordinary morning. The dew was still on the grass, the light was coming up through the trees, the cart rolled and creaked the way it always did. And then, on the road ahead of him, he saw two figures walking. They were small, about the height of a child, but they didn't move like children. They were walking away from him, in the same direction he was going, down the middle of the track. As the cart drew closer, he could see they were strangely dressed in tight dark clothing, and that the skin of their faces had an odd colour to it. He took them at first for foreigners. He couldn't have been more wrong about that, but it tells you everything about Jan Wolski that his first instinct coming upon two green-faced figures on a forest road was not to be afraid. It was to wonder whose visitors they were. The cart caught up with the two figures, and without a word, without a glance back, they hopped up onto it. They moved easily, lightly, Wolski said, as if they weighed very little. They settled themselves behind him on the cart and sat there, and now close up he could see them properly. They were about 5 feet tall. Their faces and their hands were green, not painted, not sickly, just green, the natural colour of them. Their eyes were dark and set at a slant with high cheekbones, and there didn't seem to be any white to the eyes at all. They wore one-piece suits of a tight black material that covered them completely except for the face and hands. The suits had no seams that he could see. No buttons, no fastenings, as if each of them had been poured into a single piece of dark rubber. And they were talking to each other. It was a thin, fast, high sort of speech. Words running together in a language Wolski had never heard and couldn't begin to follow. He said later, plainly, "They were talking in thin voices, unknown to me. I didn't understand any of it." He kept driving. He didn't know what else to do, and they didn't seem to want anything from him except to sit on his cart, so he let the horse carry them all on down the track. After a little way, one of them gestured. It was a clear gesture, a direction, off the track that way, toward a clearing in the trees. Wolski turned the cart the way he was told, and in the clearing he saw the thing they had brought him to. It was hanging in the air, for it was white. A clean, bright, featureless white, and it was long, about the length and shape of a bus, hanging maybe a metre or so above the grass with nothing holding it up. At each of its four corners was a kind of barrel, and through each barrel ran a black vertical rod, and the rods were turning, spinning, throwing off little flickers of colour as they went. And the whole thing was humming. A low, dense hum that he could feel as much as hear, and that got louder the closer the cart came, until he said it was like coming up on a swarm of bumblebees, angry in a wall. The horse stopped. The two beings got down off the cart, and from the underside of the white object, a small platform came down toward the ground, lowered on thin cables, like a little open lift, descending to meet him. One of the beings stepped onto the platform. It turned, and it beckoned to him. "Come." Now, this is the moment where you or I would have done almost anything other than what Jan Wolski did. We'd have run, we'd have frozen, we'd have stayed on the cart and prayed. Wolski, 70 years old, climbed down, walked across the grass to the little hanging platform and stepped onto it beside the green-faced thing that had asked him to. He said afterward he hadn't felt he was in danger. He never felt threatened, not once, the whole time. So he went. The platform rose and carried him up, and took him inside. The inside was a single rectangular room with black walls. There were no windows, there were no lamps that he could see. The only light was the daylight coming up through the open hatch he'd entered by, and somehow that seemed to be enough to see by. When he touched the walls, They felt like glass, but heavier, denser, stronger than any glass he knew. Benches lined the room, and they too hung on thin cables rather than standing on the floor. There were 4 of the beings inside now, all dressed the same, and on the floor of the craft there were birds. Several of them, crows or rooks, the blackbirds of the Polish fields. They were alive, but they couldn't move. They lay where they were, and only their eyes moved, and now and then the twitch of a wing or a leg, as if every other part of them had been switched off. Wolski had no explanation for the birds. Nobody since has had a good one either. They are one of the strangest details in the whole account, and he stated them as flatly as he stated everything else. There were paralyzed birds on the floor. He didn't know why. The beings made it clear with gestures that he should take off his clothes. He did. An old farmer undressing in a silent black room surrounded by 4 green-faced figures and a floor of paralyzed birds because they had asked him to and he could see no reason to refuse. Then one of them came toward him holding 2 grey discs. They were like saucers or like 2 small plates, and they hummed and vibrated, and they seemed almost to cling to the being's hands as it held them. 2 of the beings positioned him, turning him the way a man is turned when his photograph is being taken for a record. Front, back, one side, the other side, and each time the discs were passed over him close to the skin, humming, while he stood and let it happen. They told him nothing. They explained nothing. He simply understood that he was being looked at, measured, recorded, in some way he had no words for. And at some point during it, or just after, there came a smell. A heavy, sharp smell of sulphur, of struck matches that filled the room, and that, Wolski said, stayed in his nose and his throat for days afterward. When it was finished, they let him dress. And then Jan Wolski did the thing that of everything in this story tells you most about the man. He bowed to them. It was an old countryman's reflex, the courtesy of a man who'd been raised to mark the end of any dealing, however strange, with a small show of respect. He didn't know what they were. He didn't understand a word they'd said. They had stripped him and passed humming discs over his bare skin in a black room full of dying birds. And on his way out, Jan Wolski bowed to them, the way he'd have bowed to a neighbour or a priest or a stranger he'd shared a road with. And the beings bowed back. They led him to the platform. It carried him down to the grass. He walked back to his cart where the horse was waiting, and 2 of the beings stood in the open hatch above and watched him go. He took up the reins. He drove away. Behind him, when he was a little way off, the white object rose straight up, humming, and was gone. Wolski drove home faster than he'd come. His family saw at once that something was wrong with him. Not hurt, but shaken, lit up, not himself. He told his sons what had happened and sent them straight back to the clearing to see for themselves. By the time they got there with a neighbour, the object was gone. But the clearing wasn't empty of it. The grass was flattened and wet, with paths trodden out across it in several directions, and in the soil were rectangular marks, like footprints, or like small neat holes where something had been pressed down to take a sample. And here the one chance at hard proof was lost. Nobody cast the marks. Nobody photographed them properly. Word spread through Emilcin within hours, and the curious came, and then the police came, and between them they walked all over the clearing until there was nothing clean left to measure. There was, though, one other witness that morning, and not one anybody could accuse of inventing anything. About 800 meters from the clearing, a 6-year-old boy named Adash Popioek had also seen something in the sky. He described it as a craft like a bus, with a single window and a figure inside it. His mother and 2 other people in the village reported hearing a great noise that morning, like a roll of thunder out of a clear sky. When the case reached the authorities, it didn't go well. This was communist Poland, and the local response to an old farmer's story of green men and a flying bus was not curiosity. A school teacher complained to the citizen militia that the old man was spreading nonsense. The militia looked into it just far enough to close it. Their conclusion, more or less, was that the grandfather had fallen asleep on his cart and dreamed the whole thing. And that's usually where a story like this ends. An old man, an unbelievable account, an official shrug, and a slow fade into local legend. Except that's not where this one ended, because some years later the case was taken up properly, not by believers looking to be convinced, but by 2 academics from the University of Łódź. A psychologist, Dr. Ryszard Kitlinski, and a sociologist, Dr. Zbigniew Blania-Bolnar. And they did something almost nobody had thought to do with an abduction witness before. They tested him. They gave Wolski a full battery of examinations, a thematic apperception test, the kind that probes how a person's imagination works, a Wechsler adult intelligence test, a polygraph-style measurement of psychic tension, full-eye examinations and clinical checks. They were trying to answer as rigorously as the tools of the day allowed a simple question: was this man lying, or deluded, or neither? The physical findings came back first. He was in excellent health for 70. His eyesight, in particular, was exceptional, far better than was usual for a man his age. Whatever he'd seen, he'd had good eyes to see it with. Then came the psychological verdict, and it was blunt. The thematic testing Blania Bolner wrote fully indicated that the witness had no ability whatsoever to invent stories of any kind. This wasn't a man with a rich fantasy life dressing up an ordinary morning. This was a plain, literal, truthful old farmer whose mind didn't work that way, and, as far as the testing could establish, couldn't. They found him honest, truthful and decent, and they found that this held up under cross-examination. They put a number on it. They rated the probability that the event had been objective reality, something that really happened outside his own head, at between 90 and 98%. They rated the chance it was a hoax or a hallucination at 1 to 2%. Now, a careful listener will notice what that finding does and doesn't do. It establishes, about as firmly as anything can be established, that Jan Wolski was not lying and was not the kind of man who could have made it up. That's a real and unusual thing to be able to say about an abduction account. It does not, and cannot, establish that a craft was physically there. The honesty of the witness and the reality of the event are two different questions. The testing answers the first one with extraordinary confidence, the second one it can't reach at all. And that's the knot at the centre of Emilcin. We have one of the most credible witnesses in the entire history of these cases, sober, devout, plain-spoken, consistent for the rest of his life, formally certified as incapable of invention by people who set out to catch him in it. And we have no craft, no casts of the footprints, no photographs, no physical thing you could put on a table. So what do we do with it? There are really only three ways to read the morning of the 10th of May. The first is that it happened more or less exactly as Jan Wolski said. A real craft, real occupants, a real examination on a real lift. The weight behind this reading is the man himself, plus the boy 800 meters away who saw a bus in the sky, plus the villagers who heard the thunder. The weakness is the one nothing can fix. There's no physical trace left. And a sincere witness, however sincere, is not the same thing as a recovered piece of a spacecraft. The second is that Wolski had an experience that was completely real to him, but that came from inside his own mind. A vivid waking dream on a slow cart on a quiet morning, the kind of thing the brain can produce and dress in total conviction. This fits the science neatly. He wasn't lying, and there was nothing physical to find because there was nothing physical. The trouble is the corroboration. The boy, the noise, the flattened grass, those are hard to fold into a dream unless they're coincidences the story later swept up. The third is that something genuinely physical but entirely earthly happened that morning. A test, an aircraft, something military in a country that had plenty of military secrets, and an old farmer with no frame of reference built it into the only kind of story that could hold it. The weakness there is that nothing he described maps onto any aircraft anyone has ever flown. Green men, a lift on cables, humming discs, a floor of paralysed crows. That's not a misremembered helicopter. None of the three are fully satisfying. That's why we're still talking about it. Jan Wolski went back to his farm. He lived another 12 years. He never changed the story, never added to it, never tried to make money or fame from it. He told it the same plain way every time he was asked, and the rest of the time he got on with the work of an old man on the land. He died in 1990 at 82. In 2005, a UFO research group from Warsaw came out to the clearing near Emilcin and put up a monument, a metal cube balanced on a stone marking the spot. It carries the date and a line that reads, "The truth will astonish us in the future." It's the first place in the world where an alien abduction has its own memorial. People drive out to the flat Polish farmland to see it and stand in the clearing where an old man once turned his cart off the track because two green-faced strangers asked him to. Was it a craft, and real occupants, and a hum you could feel in your chest? Was it a waking dream so complete that a truthful man carried it to his grave? Was it something the army flew that morning that nobody will ever admit to? The The scientists who tested him couldn't say. They could only say that he wasn't lying. And maybe the part that stays with you isn't the craft or the discs or the paralysed birds on the black floor. Maybe it's the head-lowering bow. An old farmer at the end of the strangest few minutes of any life, doing the only thing he knew how to do, marking the moment with a small show of courtesy. And whatever they were, they bowed back.